I never expected that the most terrifying guy on campus, the one everyone whispered about in dark corners, would end up pinning me against our shared dorm door on our very first night, his cold eyes burning with a dangerous heat that promised to ruin my life. Before we dive into the story of how my life completely flipped upside down, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment below letting me know what you think. It really helps the channel grow. Now let's begin. Part 1. The Shadow in Room 308. My name is Leo. I'm 19 years old, a sophomore majoring in English literature, and someone who generally prefers to fly under the radar. I like quiet libraries, warm tea, and predictable schedules. So, when the university housing office sent me an urgent email on a rainy Tuesday afternoon stating that my previous dorm assignment had been canceled due to a plumbing disaster, I didn't think much of it. I figured I would just be moved to another standard double room, probably with some quiet guy who spent all his time playing video games. Then, I scrolled down to see the name of my new roommate. Room 308, Asher Vance. My heart did a sudden, violent flip in my chest. Asher Vance. The name itself felt heavy, like a shadow stretching across the screen. If you went to our university, you knew who Asher Vance was, even if you had never actually spoken a word to him. He was a 21-year-old architecture major, but more than that, he was the campus enigma. People whispered about him in the dining halls like he was some kind of urban legend. He was impossibly tall, striking in a way that made people stop breathing when he walked by, and colder than a midwinter storm. Rumor had it he came from an old, incredibly wealthy family, but he lived like a ghost, never attending campus events, never smiling, and absolutely never letting anyone get close to him. And now, I was supposed to share a tiny room with him for the entire academic year. I tried to tell myself that the rumors were exaggerated. College students love drama. They probably just turned a quiet, introverted guy into some dark, mysterious villain for entertainment. With that comforting, though highly fragile, thought in my mind, I dragged my 2 massive suitcases and a bulging backpack up the creaking stairs of the old residence hall. The hallway of the 3rd floor smelled faintly of old wood, floor wax, and rainy day dampness. When I finally reached room 308, my palms were sweating. I took a deep breath, gripped the brass doorknob, and pushed it open. The room was already half occupied, and the contrast between the 2 sides was jarring. The left side of the room was completely bare, just a mattress, an empty desk, and a wardrobe waiting for me. But the right side looked like a page out of a high-end, minimalist design magazine. The bed was made with crisp, charcoal gray sheets. The desk was perfectly organized, featuring a sleek laptop, a single black notebook, and a set of professional drafting pens. There wasn't a single stray paper, a single speck of dust, or a single piece of color. It was cold, precise, and utterly intimidating. I dragged my heavy suitcase inside, the wheels squeaking loudly against the hardwood floor. I was in the middle of heaving my second bag over the threshold when the door behind me opened. The air in the room instantly changed. It felt heavier, colder, and suddenly charged with a strange, crackling energy. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Standing in the doorway was Asher Vance. He was even more striking in person than the rumors suggested. He stood at least 6'2", with broad, powerful shoulders clad in a heavy black leather jacket over a simple dark t-shirt. His dark, messy hair fell slightly over his forehead, framing a face that looked like it had been sculpted out of marble. His jawline was sharp, his lips were set in a flat, indifferent line, and his eyes, a piercing, icy gray, locked onto mine. The silence that stretched between us was absolute. It felt like the entire world had paused just to see what would happen next. I felt incredibly small standing under his intense gaze, my pulse beginning to thud wildly against my ribs. "You're late," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, rough around the edges, vibrating through the small room and straight down my spine. It was the kind of voice that commanded attention without even trying. I blinked, momentarily thrown off. I quickly glanced down at my wrist, realized I wasn't wearing a watch, and then checked my phone. What? It's only 4 in the afternoon. Move-in hours go until 6. "I don't care about the university's schedule," Asher said coldly, stepping into the room. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing us inside. "You're late for my schedule. I wanted my space settled before the sun went down." "Well, sorry to ruin your afternoon," I muttered, my defensive instincts kicking in. I didn't like being talked down to, even if the guy talking to me looked like a literal dark angel. But I had to drag these bags up 3 flights of stairs. A little help would have been nice, but since you didn't offer, you'll just have to deal with me being 5 minutes behind your personal clock. For a second, I wondered if I had crossed a line. Asher froze, his piercing gray eyes narrowing as he stared at me. Nobody spoke to him like that. I could feel the tension in the room thickening, pressing against my chest. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me. With every step he took, a faint, intoxicating scent washed over me. It was a mix of rich cedarwood, fresh rain, and something warm and metallic, like embers in the dark. It was a scent that felt entirely too intimate, wrapping around my senses and making my head spin. He stopped just inches away from me. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating off his body, contrasting sharply with his icy demeanor. I had to tilt my head back just to look him in the eye. "You have a loud mouth, Leo," he murmured, his eyes dropping to my lips for a split second before rising back to lock with mine. My heart did another violent stutter. How did he know my name? Right, the housing portal. Still, hearing my name slip past his lips in that dark, gravelly tone made my knees feel suspiciously weak. "I just don't like being treated like an inconvenience," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I was sure he could hear the frantic drumming of my heart. "You are an inconvenience," Asher replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And if you want to survive this semester in this room, you'll learn to keep your distance." Before I could process his words, he turned on his heel, grabbed a black leather notebook from his desk, and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, sinking down onto the edge of my bare mattress. My hands were shaking slightly. That guy was a walking hurricane of intensity, danger, and a strange, magnetic attraction that I didn't want to admit I felt. I shook my head, trying to clear the lingering scent of cedarwood from my mind. "Great. Just great," I muttered to myself. I'm rooming with a hostile, gorgeous psychopath. Determined to ignore the lingering electricity in the air, I began to unpack my things. I put away my clothes, set up my books on my desk, and made my bed with my favorite soft, beige comforter. I tried to make my side of the room look as warm and cozy as possible, a desperate attempt to combat the cold, dark aura radiating from Asher's half of the room. By the time I finished, night had fallen. The rain outside had picked up, drumming a heavy, rhythmic beat against the window pane. I sat at my desk, trying to focus on reading a chapter for my literature class, but my eyes kept drifting toward the door. It was past 9. Where was he? Did he have classes this late? Or was he out doing whatever mysterious things campus enigmas did in the dark? Just as I was about to close my textbook, the door opened. Asher walked in, his leather jacket slightly damp from the rain. He didn't look at me as he hung his jacket on a hook by the door. He moved with a quiet, predatory grace that I found myself staring at, unable to look away. He wore a fitted gray t-shirt now, the soft fabric clinging to the hard lines of his chest and the muscles of his arms. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and began to work. The only sound in the room was the steady patter of rain and the soft click of his keyboard. The silence was suffocating. I wanted to say something, anything to break the ice, but the memory of his cold warning kept my mouth shut. Still, the tension between us felt alive, stretching across the small space like a tightly wound wire. Every time he shifted in his chair, my eyes instinctively darted toward him. Every time I turned a page, I felt his icy gray gaze flicker in my direction, assessing me, watching me. An hour passed. My eyes were growing heavy, the exhaustion of the move finally catching up to me. I decided to call it a night. I stood up, grabbing my comfortable sleep shirt and sweatpants, and headed toward the small, shared bathroom adjacent to our room. But as I stepped past Asher's desk, my foot caught on the edge of his heavy trash can. With a startled gasp, my balance vanished. I began to fall forward, my hands instinctively reaching out to brace myself. I braced for the hard impact of the floor, but it never came. Instead, a powerful hand gripped my waist, pulling me backward with incredible force. My back slammed against a hard, muscular chest. A strong arm wrapped securely around my middle, holding me flush against a warm, solid body. I gasped, my heart leaping into my throat as the intoxicating scent of cedarwood and rain completely enveloped me, flooding my senses. I looked up, my eyes wide with shock. Asher was looking down at me, his face mere inches from mine. His grip on my waist was firm, his long fingers pressing into my hip. His gray eyes were no longer cold, They were dark, intense, and burning with a sudden, unreadable heat that made my breath catch. "I told you to keep your distance, Leo," he whispered, his voice dangerously low, his breath warm against my cheek. I slipped," I stammered, my heart racing so fast I was sure he could feel it vibrating through my back. He didn't let go. Instead, his grip tightened slightly, pulling me even closer, until there was absolutely no space between us. The tension in the dark room was suffocating, electric, and terrifyingly addictive. "Then learn to watch your step," Asher murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips once more, holding me captive in his embrace. "Because if you fall, I might not want to let you up." My throat went completely dry. I was frozen, trapped in the orbit of the campus enigma, and for the first time, I realized that surviving this semester wasn't going to be about keeping my distance. It was going to be about trying not to drown in him. End of Part 1. Part 2. The silence in the room was so absolute that I could hear the erratic, frantic thudding of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Asher's arm was a band of pure steel wrapped around my waist, his chest a solid wall of heat against my back. The rich, intoxicating scent of cedarwood, rain, and that dangerous metallic warmth completely paralyzed my senses. For a moment that felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. I was trapped in his orbit, suspended in a space where the air felt too thin to breathe. My voice was barely a whisper, trembling pathetically. "I can stand up now." Asher didn't release me immediately. I felt his chest rise and fall in a slow, deliberate breath against my spine. His fingers twitched against my hip, a subtle pressure that sent a jolt of electricity straight down to my toes. Then slowly, as if withdrawing from a burn, his arm unwrapped from my waist. He stepped back, instantly severing the heat between us. The sudden cold that rushed in to replace his warmth left me shivering. "Careful," Asher said. His voice was no longer a dangerous whisper, but had returned to its default setting, flat, indifferent, and freezing cold. He turned away from me, walking back to his pristine desk and sitting down as if he hadn't just short-circuited my entire nervous system. "The floor is uneven near the desk. Don't make a habit of falling, Leo. I won't always be there to catch you." I scrambled to my feet, my face burning so hot I was sure it was glowing in the dim light of the room. I grabbed my sleepwear from my bed, not daring to look at him again, and practically sprinted into the small, shared bathroom, locking the door behind me. I leaned over the sink, turning on the cold tap and splashing water onto my flushed cheeks. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my chest heaving. What was that? I asked myself, my mind spinning. He's just a roommate. A terrifying, gorgeous, overly intense roommate. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the phantom pressure of his hand on my waist and the ghost of his breath against my cheek. I tossed and turned, hyper-aware of the steady, rhythmic sound of his breathing coming from the other side of the room. Asher Vance slept as quietly as he lived, completely still, like a statue carved from ice. When my alarm finally dragged me out of a restless sleep at 7 in the morning, the heavy rain from the night before had reduced to a soft, gloomy drizzle. I groaned, rubbing my tired eyes, and slowly pushed myself up. I expected to find Asher's side of the room empty. Surely, a guy like him had early architecture studios or elite secret society meetings to attend. Instead, a rich, dark aroma filled the air, completely overriding the stale smell of the old dormitory. I blinked through my sleep haze and looked across the room. Asher was standing near a small, sleek espresso machine that definitely had not been there yesterday. It looked like it cost more than my entire tuition. He was dressed flawlessly in dark slacks and a fitted black turtleneck that emphasized the broadness of his shoulders. His messy dark hair was slightly damp, indicating he had already showered. He moved with a quiet, practiced elegance, pouring steaming dark coffee into 2 sleek, matte black ceramic mugs. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, watching him like he was a dangerous predator that had accidentally wandered into a domestic setting. The campus enigma, the untouchable ice prince, was making coffee. Asher didn't look up, but his sharp voice shattered the quiet morning. "If you're going to stare, you might as well make yourself useful and take this." I flinched, my cheeks heating up. "I wasn't staring," I muttered defensively, though I quickly stood up and crossed the room. He slid one of the black mugs across his desk toward me. I picked it up hesitantly, letting the warmth seep into my cold fingers. I took a cautious sip, expecting it to be bitter and harsh, much like his personality. Instead, it was incredibly smooth, with rich notes of dark chocolate and a hint of something sweet. It was, without a doubt, the best coffee I had ever tasted. Wow! I breathed out, completely forgetting my pride for a second. This is really good. Asher took a sip from his own mug, his icy gray eyes flicking up to meet mine. I don't tolerate mediocrity, Leo. Not in my work, not in my space, and certainly not in my coffee. It was a backhanded compliment, or maybe a subtle warning, but I was too tired to decipher it. Well, thanks, I said softly, retreating to my side of the room to grab my clothes for the day. I didn't peg you as the domestic type. I'm not, he replied coldly, setting his mug down and grabbing a sleek leather messenger bag. I just prefer not to rely on others. Don't touch my machine while I'm gone. Without another word, he walked out of the door, leaving me alone in the quiet room with nothing but the lingering scent of espresso and cedarwood. The rest of the morning was a chaotic blur. I had 2 back-to-back literature classes, and the lack of sleep was severely impairing my ability to focus on Shakespearean tragedies. However, keeping my eyes open wasn't the hardest part of the day. It was the whispering. Our university campus wasn't massive, which meant news traveled faster than light. By the time I walked into the dining hall for a quick lunch, it felt like I had a giant neon sign blinking above my head. Is that him? I heard a girl whisper loudly to her friend as I passed their table with my tray. Yeah, that's the sophomore. The English lit guy. He actually got placed in room 308. No way. Asher Vance let him stay? I heard Asher paid the university double the housing fee last year just to keep the second bed empty. I give it 3 days before the guy transfers out crying. I gripped my plastic tray tighter, keeping my head down as I navigated to an empty table in the corner. My stomach churned, completely killing my appetite. Paid double to keep it empty? Then why was I there? Why didn't he just kick me out or demand the housing office move me? The mystery of Asher Vance was giving me a massive headache. By the time I finally returned to the dorm late in the afternoon, I was mentally and physically exhausted. I dropped my heavy backpack onto the floor with a loud thud and collapsed face first onto my bed, burying my head under my favorite beige pillow. I just wanted peace. I wanted quiet. I wanted a solid 10 hours of sleep. Bang, bang, bang. The sudden, violent knocking on the dorm door made me jump nearly a foot in the air. Before I could even untangle myself from my blanket, the door flew open, hitting the wall with a loud crack. Vance, rise and shine, you miserable hermit. A loud, excessively cheerful voice boomed. 2 guys strode into the room like they owned the entire building. They radiated wealth, confidence, and chaos. The one who had shouted was tall, with perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing a designer bomber jacket and a smirk that suggested he had never been told no in his entire life. The guy behind him was slightly shorter, with dark hair tied in a neat half-up style, wearing a tailored navy coat. He looked quieter, but his eyes darted around the room with sharp, calculating precision. I froze on my bed, clutching my blanket to my chest, my hair sticking up in every direction. The blonde guy stopped dead in his tracks, his bright blue eyes locking onto me. His smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. He slowly turned his head to look at his friend. Julian, am I hallucinating, or is there a living, breathing human being sitting on the peasant side of Asher's room? Julian, the quiet one, adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses, his dark eyes assessing me up and down. You are not hallucinating, Tristan. Though I admit, this is an unexpected development. Tristan immediately turned back to me, a slow, incredibly charming grin spreading across his face. He walked right past Asher's pristine desk and approached my bed, leaning against my wooden bed frame. Well, hello there. I'm Tristan. And you are? Leo, I said cautiously, shrinking back slightly. These guys were intense in a completely different way than Asher. They were overwhelming. Leo, Tristan tasted the word, his grin widening. Cute name for a cute guy. Tell me, Leo, how exactly did you end up in the dragon's lair? Did you lose a bet? Make a deal with a demon? Housing error, I muttered, feeling utterly out of my depth. A housing error, Julian echoed, stepping further into the room. Fascinating. Asher despises roommates. He usually has them relocated within an hour. The fact that your belongings are still here implies a level of tolerance I didn't know he possessed. Maybe he kept him because he's easy on the eyes, Tristan teased, winking at me. He reached out, his hand hovering over my blanket as if to playfully tug it. You know, Leo, if Vance is too cold for you, my dorm has plenty of. Touch him, Tristan, and I will break your fingers. The temperature in the room plummeted instantly. I gasped, my head snapping toward the doorway. Asher was standing there, his broad frame blocking the exit. He looked absolutely lethal. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle ticked in his cheek, and his icy gray eyes were locked onto Tristan's hand, which was still hovering near me. The scent of cedarwood and dark, burning embers flooded the room, heavy and aggressive. It was a suffocating aura of absolute dominance and territorial fury. Tristan slowly raised both his hands in a gesture of surrender, though his smirk didn't waver. "Relax, Ash. I was just welcoming your new roommate. You really should have told us you adopted a stray." Asher stepped into the room, kicking the door shut behind him with a sharp snap. He didn't look at me, but his imposing presence acted like a physical shield between me and his chaotic friends. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "We came to make sure you actually exist," Julian said smoothly, seemingly unbothered by Asher's lethal glare. "And to inform you that the underground gallery party is tonight. You skipped the last 3. You are attending this one." "I have work to do," Asher dismissed instantly, moving toward his desk. "No, you don't," Tristan countered, crossing his arms. "It's the beginning of the semester, you perfectionist freak. You're coming. It's exclusive, there's free high-end liquor, and half the architecture faculty will be there trying to scout you. You have to go." Asher ignored him, opening his laptop. Tristan sighed dramatically, then his eyes flicked back to me. A mischievous glint appeared in his blue eyes. "Well, if Mr. Sunshine won't come, what about you, Leo? Want to come to a real party? See how the elite half lives? I promise to keep you safe from the big bad wolves." My eyes widened in panic. "Me? No, I have literature essays to read. And I don't do parties." "Really?" "Nonsense." Tristan stepped closer again, his charming smile returning. "A tragedy to let a cute face hide in a dorm on a Friday night. Come on, be my +1. I'll even buy you a drink." "He's not going with you." Asher's voice cut through the air like a blade. He slammed his laptop shut, the loud noise making me flinch. He stood up slowly, turning to face Tristan. The height and sheer imposing width of Asher Vance suddenly felt very apparent in the small room. "He's not your toy, Tristan," Asher said, his voice dropping into a register that sent a shiver down my spine. "Back off." Tristan raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by the genuine possessiveness in Asher's tone. Julian watched the exchange with narrowed, calculated eyes, a silent observer processing this new, strange dynamic. "Fine." Tristan held up his hands again, backing away toward the door. "Message received, loud and clear. But you're still coming to the party tonight, Vance. 9 sharp. Don't make me drag you there." With a final, lingering look at me, Tristan and Julian slipped out of the door, leaving silence in their wake. I let out a shaky breath, feeling like a hurricane had just passed through the room. I looked over at Asher. He was still standing by his desk, his chest rising and falling heavily. He finally turned his head, his piercing gray eyes locking onto mine. The coldness was gone, replaced by that dangerous, burning heat I had seen the night before. He walked toward my bed, his steps slow and deliberate. I instinctively pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest. He stopped right in front of me, leaning down until his face was leveled with mine. "Get dressed," Asher ordered quietly, the scent of cedarwood wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I stared at him, bewildered. "What? Why?" His gaze dropped to my lips for a fleeting second before rising to meet my eyes, leaving me breathless. "Because," Asher murmured, his voice rough and commanding, "if you're going to step into my world tonight, you're going with me." End of Part 2. Part 3. I stared at him, my brain completely short-circuiting. The command hung in the heavy, cedar-scented air of our small dorm room. Asher Vance, the ice prince of the architecture department, the guy who had threatened to make my life miserable just 24 hours ago, was now demanding I accompany him to an elite underground party. I can't," I stammered, my back still pressed flat against the cold wall. "I don't have anything to wear to something like that. Tristan said it was an exclusive gallery event. I own hoodies and ripped jeans, Asher. I'll look like a lost delivery boy." Asher didn't move away. He remained hovering just inches from me, his imposing frame blocking out the rest of the room. His icy gray eyes slowly trailed down my body, a deliberate, scorching gaze that made my skin flush beneath my oversized sleep shirt, before snapping back up to meet my eyes. "You have 20 minutes, he said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that settled deep in my chest. "Find something dark. And don't make me wait, Leo. I'm not known for my patience. He finally stepped back, the oppressive, electric heat retreating with him. He turned his back to me, slipping his heavy leather jacket off his shoulders to reveal the perfect fit of his black turtleneck, grabbing his watch from his pristine desk. Taking that as my cue to move before my legs entirely gave out, I practically scrambled over to my side of the room. My hands were shaking as I aggressively rummaged through my closet. He was right, I needed something dark. I finally unearthed a deep, burgundy knit sweater that hugged my shoulders nicely, pairing it with my sharpest black jeans and a pair of clean, dark boots. It wasn't designer, it wasn't silk, but it was the best I had. When I emerged from the bathroom, running a nervous hand through my messy hair to try and give it some semblance of style, Asher was waiting by the door. He leaned against the wooden frame, looking like a modern-day villain straight out of a high-end fashion editorial. When his eyes landed on me, he froze. The room went dead silent. For a terrifyingly long moment, he just stared, his sharp gaze raking over the burgundy sweater, down to my boots, and back up to my flushed face. The air in the room instantly thickened, his signature scent of rain and dark, burning embers pulsing outward, wrapping around me like an invisible, heavy blanket. I shifted uncomfortably, pulling at the hem of my sweater. I told you I didn't have anything rich enough for your crowd. I can just stay. It's fine, Asher interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, sounding rougher than usual. He cleared his throat, his jaw tightening as he reached for the doorknob. Stay close to me tonight. Don't wander off. Understand? I swallowed hard, nodding once. Understood. The drive to the party was a suffocating experience. Asher drove a sleek, matte black sports car that purred like a dangerous beast. The interior was small, meaning our shoulders were practically brushing every time he shifted gears. The thick silence in the car was heavy with that same intoxicating, magnetic tension that seemed to follow us everywhere. My heart beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs the entire way, my mind racing with 100 questions I was too terrified to ask. When we finally pulled up to the venue, my stomach tied itself into a massive knot. It was a sprawling, multi-level underground art gallery situated in the wealthy district of the city. Bass-heavy music vibrated through the pavement, and the entrance was guarded by two massive bouncers who were turning people away left and right. Asher didn't even slow down. He walked straight toward the entrance, his presence commanding such immediate authority that the bouncers simply unhooked the velvet rope and stepped aside without a single word. I hurried behind him, trying to make myself as small as possible. The moment we stepped inside, the atmosphere hit me like a physical blow. The gallery was dimly lit with neon purple and deep red lights, casting sharp shadows across the modern art pieces hanging on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, aged whiskey, and the heavy mixed pheromones of the campus elite. Hundreds of students dressed in designer clothing were talking, laughing, and dancing. I instantly regretted coming. I felt entirely out of place, like a rabbit thrown into a pit of well-dressed wolves. But then, the most unbelievable thing happened. As Asher stepped fully into the main hall, the shift in the room was palpable. It wasn't immediate, but like a wave rippling across a dark ocean, heads began to turn. Conversations trailed off. The music seemed to fade into the background as people realized exactly who had just walked through the door. "Oh my God, is that Asher Vance?" a girl standing near the coat check gasped, grabbing her friend's arm. "He actually showed up? I thought he hated these things," a guy nearby whispered, staring openly. Then, their eyes shifted to me. The whispers grew louder, sharper, and filled with a sudden, venomous curiosity. "Wait, who is that with him? Is that a freshman? Why is he walking in with Vance? I heard he finally took a roommate. You don't think that's him, do you? Why would Asher bring him here?" I shrank in on myself, my chest tightening with anxiety. The collective weight of 100 staring eyes made it hard to breathe. I instinctively took a step back, wanting to retreat into the shadows near the entrance, wanting to escape the suffocating attention. Before I could move another inch, a large, impossibly warm hand shot out and firmly wrapped around my wrist. I gasped, looking up. Asher wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking down at me, his icy eyes dark and fiercely protective. Without a word, his hand slid down from my wrist, his long fingers seamlessly intertwining with mine. He gripped my hand with a crushing, absolute certainty that sent a jolt of pure electricity straight up my arm and directly into my chest. My brain completely flatlined. Asher Vance was holding my hand. He didn't just hold it. He pulled me slightly behind him, turning his body into a physical shield against the staring crowd. With our hands locked together for everyone to see, he began walking right through the center of the gallery. The crowd parted for him instinctively. Like a king walking through his court, Asher moved with effortless, lethal grace, ignoring the shocked gasps and the frantic whispering erupting on all sides. My face was burning, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might break my ribs, but the grip he had on my hand made me feel entirely grounded. The terrifying campus enigma was holding on to me like I was something precious, something he refused to let go of. He led us to a secluded VIP booth situated on a raised platform in the back of the gallery. Sitting on the plush leather couches were Tristan and Julian, along with a few other intimidatingly attractive people. When Tristan saw us approaching, specifically when he saw our joined hands, his jaw practically hit the floor. "Well, I'll be damned," Tristan breathed out, sitting forward, a wildly delighted smirk spreading across his face. The Ice King descends from his tower, and he brings a +1. A very tightly held +1, I might add. Asher finally released my hand as we reached the table, but he didn't move away. He guided me to the inner corner of the U-shaped couch and sat directly beside me, leaving absolutely zero space between our thighs. The warmth radiating from his body was a comforting anchor in the chaotic room. "Shut your mouth, Tristan," Asher warned, his voice low but laced with a dangerous edge that made the others at the table shift nervously. "I'm just saying, it's a historic night," Tristan chuckled, waving over a waitress dressed in black. She quickly placed a tray of brightly colored cocktails and dark liquors onto the glass table. "Drink, Leo. You look like you need one to survive sitting next to this storm cloud." I tentatively reached out toward a tall glass of something blue, but before my fingers could even graze the condensation, Asher's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around my wrist to stop me. "No," Asher said flatly, his eyes scanning the drinks, then the waitress, and finally the crowded room. He grabbed a sealed bottle of imported sparkling water from the tray, cracked it open himself, and handed it to me. "Drink this." Tristan burst out laughing. "Paranoid much, Ash? Nobody is going to drug the kid while he's sitting with us." "I don't take chances," Asher replied coldly, his gaze never leaving the crowd. I clutched the cold water bottle, my heart doing another wild flutter. He was protecting me. He was making sure I was safe in an environment he knew I didn't understand. I took a sip, leaning slightly back into the leather couch. As I did, I felt something brush against my leg. Beneath the low, shadowed glass of the table, out of sight from Tristan, Julian, and the rest of the party, Asher's hand slowly moved across the cushion. His long fingers found mine in the dark, slipping between them and tangling our hands together once again. His thumb began tracing a slow, rhythmic circle over my knuckles, a hidden, incredibly intimate gesture that made my breath hitch in my throat. He was holding my hand again. Only this time, it wasn't a statement to the crowd. It was a secret just for us. I looked at his face, but he was casually staring out at the gallery, his expression an unreadable mask of cold indifference, completely contrasting the burning heat of his grip under the table. I was so distracted by the sensory overload of his touch that I almost didn't notice the girl walking up to our table until the entire group went completely silent. She was breathtaking. She had long, sleek dark hair, piercing green eyes, and was wearing a backless emerald green dress that looked like it cost a semester's worth of tuition. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power she held over a room. The whispers in the crowd spiked again, louder this time. "Victoria," Julian muttered under his breath, adjusting his glasses. Tristan winced, suddenly finding his drink very interesting. The girl stopped right in front of Asher. She didn't even glance at me. She leaned over the table, a sweet, predatory smile curving her glossy red lips, and placed her perfectly manicured hand directly onto Asher's broad shoulder. "Asher, darling," Victoria purred, her voice dripping with honey and dark intentions. "I heard a rumor you were finally gracing us with your presence. You've disappeared for weeks. You know how much I hate it when you hide from me." She trailed a finger down the collar of his turtleneck, leaning in close enough that her floral, overwhelming perfume clashed horribly with Asher's scent of rain and cedar. I froze, a sudden, unfamiliar spike of something ugly and heavy, jealousy. My mind supplied unhelpfully, settling in my stomach. Was this his girlfriend? Someone he was seeing? My eyes dropped to my lap, suddenly feeling incredibly stupid for thinking the hand holding under the table meant anything. I tried to pull my hand free from his grip, but Asher didn't let go. If anything, his fingers clamped down harder, locking mine in place with an iron grip. He slowly turned his head to look at Victoria. The temperature at the table dropped to sub-zero. His expression was so terrifyingly blank, so utterly devoid of any warmth or affection, that even she faltered slightly, her smile slipping. "Remove your hand, Victoria," Asher said, his voice quiet, deadly, and completely flat. Victoria blinked, a flash of genuine hurt crossing her perfectly contoured face before she recovered, letting out a breathy laugh. "Oh, come on, Ash. Don't be so cold. You know we always find our way back to each other. Let's go somewhere quieter." "I have zero interest in going anywhere with you," Asher interrupted, his voice slicing through the loud bass of the music like a scythe. He finally shifted his gaze, his icy gray eyes turning to look directly at me. The harshness in his face melted away entirely, replaced by a sudden, intense possessiveness that made my lungs stop working. He lifted his free hand, resting it on the back of my neck, his thumb brushing softly against my pulse point. "I am already spoken for," Asher declared, the gravelly rumble of his voice carrying perfectly across the silent VIP section. Victoria gasped, her green eyes snapping to me as if she had only just realized I existed. The look she gave me was pure, unfiltered venom. Her face paled, her manicured hands curling into tight fists at her sides. She stared at Asher, then at me, the utter humiliation painting her features. "You've got to be joking," she spat out, her voice trembling with fury. "Him? A nobody sophomore? You're replacing me with him? If you insult him again, I will personally ensure you are banned from every gallery in this city," Asher replied, his tone chillingly calm. "Leave. Now." Victoria let out a shaky, enraged breath, glaring daggers at me one last time before turning on her heel and storming away into the crowd. The VIP table was dead silent. Tristan was staring at Asher with wide, disbelieving eyes. Julian looked fascinated. And I was sitting there, frozen in shock, my pulse hammering wildly against Asher's thumb on my neck, completely tethered to the beautiful, terrifying campus enigma who had just claimed me in front of the entire elite world. End of Part 3. Part 4. The silence that followed Victoria's dramatic departure from the VIP section was thick enough to cut with a knife. My heart was hammering so violently against my ribs that I was genuinely afraid everyone at the table could hear it. Asher's hand was still resting on the back of my neck, his long fingers warm and steady, while his thumb continued its slow, hypnotic caress against my pulse point. "Spoken for," Tristan finally repeated, breaking the heavy silence with a low, disbelieving whistle. He leaned back into the leather sofa, his bright blue eyes darting between Asher and me with a mix of awe and absolute amusement. "Well, damn. I've known you for 3 years, Ash, and I don't think I've ever seen you claim a living soul. Not even a pet goldfish." "Shut up, Tristan," Asher said, his voice flat and warning, but he didn't pull his hand away from my neck. If anything, his grip under the table, our tangled fingers completely hidden from the rest of the group, tightened just a fraction, a silent reassurance that anchored me in the chaotic room. Julian pushed his silver-rimmed glasses up his nose, analyzing the situation with the quiet intensity of a scientist observing a rare phenomenon. "It appears our Ice King has finally melted," he murmured softly, taking a sip of his bourbon. I felt my cheeks burn with a furious heat. I didn't know where to look. I was a sophomore who spent his Friday nights reading 19th century poetry, and suddenly I was sitting in the most exclusive underground club in the city, tethered to a guy who commanded the entire room just by existing. I wanted to ask him what he meant by it, spoken for, but the words were stuck in my throat, tangled in the overwhelming scent of cedarwood, dark rain, and the faint, dangerous spice of his unique pheromones. As the hours dragged on, the initial shock of the confrontation slowly faded, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The heavy bass of the electronic music vibrated through the floorboards, traveling up my legs and settling in my chest. The flashing neon lights of the gallery became a blurred, colorful haze. My body, still recovering from the stress of moving dorms and the sheer adrenaline of surviving an hour in Asher Vance's world, was rapidly shutting down. I didn't even realize how heavily I was leaning against him until my head inadvertently drooped, my cheek coming to rest against the solid, warm muscle of his shoulder. I should have pulled away. I should have apologized and sat up straight. But Asher's scent was like a narcotic, wrapping around my exhausted mind and lulling me into a state of absolute floaty calm. Beneath the table, his thumb continued its gentle rhythm against my knuckles. The noise of the party faded into a distant, muffled hum. My eyelids fluttered shut, unable to fight the heavy pull of sleep. I was hovering somewhere between consciousness and dreams when I felt a gentle shift beside me. Leo. The voice was low, incredibly soft, and rumbling right against my ear. I mumbled intelligently, too tired to even open my eyes. Hey, sleepyhead, Asher murmured, the rough edges of his voice completely smoothed out. Wake up. I forced my eyes open to slits, finding Asher leaning over me. The cold, intimidating mask he wore for the rest of the world was entirely gone, replaced by a look of such unguarded softness that it made my heart skip a beat. Before I could process what was happening, the world tilted sideways. Asher stood up, entirely ignoring Tristan's sudden laugh, and effortlessly hauled me onto his back. My brain completely flatlined. 1 second I was melting into the leather couch, and the next, my legs were wrapped around Asher's narrow waist, my arms draped loosely over his broad shoulders. I was being carried. Wait, I gasped, the sudden movement jarring me slightly awake. I tried to wriggle down. What are you doing? Put me down, everyone is staring. Let them stare, Asher replied evenly, easily securing his hands beneath my thighs to hitch me higher on his back. You're half asleep, Leo. If I let you walk, you'll trip over your own boots before we even reach the exit. Leaving so soon, Cinderella? Tristan called out from the table, clearly enjoying the spectacle. The night is young. The party is over for me, Asher threw over his shoulder, not even bothering to look back. He carried me through the dense, pulsing crowd of the gallery. I could feel the burning stares of hundreds of students tracking our every move. The whispers erupted like wildfire all around us. The terrifying, untouchable enigma of the architecture department was giving a piggyback ride to his new roommate. I was so embarrassed I wanted the floor to swallow me whole, so I did the only logical thing my sleep-deprived brain could think of. I buried my face into the crook of his neck, hiding from the staring eyes. Asher's chest vibrated with a soft, quiet chuckle, and his grip on my legs tightened protectively as we finally stepped out of the suffocating club and into the cool, crisp night air. The contrast was immediate. The loud, pounding bass was replaced by the distant hum of city traffic and the gentle rustle of wind through the campus trees. The cold air brushed against my flushed cheeks, but I was entirely shielded from the chill by the furnace-like heat radiating from Asher's body. His strides were long, smooth, and steady. The rhythmic motion was incredibly soothing. The streets were mostly empty, the golden glow of the street lamps casting long, dancing shadows on the pavement as we walked back toward the dormitories. You didn't have to carry me, I mumbled weakly, my chin resting heavily on his shoulder. I'm heavy. You weigh nothing, Asher corrected quietly, his voice a low rumble in the quiet night. And I wanted to. I didn't argue. I was far too tired, and being held by him felt terrifyingly right. I closed my eyes, letting the steady beat of his heart and the comforting scent of rain and cedar carry me the rest of the way. By the time we reached room 308, my mind had already drifted halfway into a deep sleep. I barely registered the click of the lock or the squeak of the heavy wooden door. Asher stepped inside, moving carefully in the dark room, and gently lowered me onto my bed. The mattress was soft, and I groaned quietly as I sank into the pillows, pulling my knees up slightly. I thought he would just walk away, cross the invisible boundary to his immaculate side of the room, and leave me to sleep. But he didn't. Through the dim moonlight filtering through the window, I saw Asher kneel beside my bed. His large hands reached down, gently gripping my right ankle. With slow, methodical movements, he began untying the laces of my boots. He slid the heavy shoe off, placing it neatly on the floor, before doing the same with the left. His touch was incredibly gentle, contrasting so violently with the aggressive, intimidating alpha the rest of the campus saw. I lay there, watching him through half-open eyes, my heart doing a strange, fluttering dance in my chest. When he finished with my boots, he didn't stand up. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands resting on the edge of my mattress. He was so close. The heavy, intoxicating scent of his pheromones flooded the small space between us, making my head spin. I could see the sharp lines of his face bathed in the pale moonlight, his icy gray eyes darkened with an emotion I couldn't decipher. Asher, I whispered, my voice sounding incredibly fragile in the quiet room. His gaze dropped to my lips. The air in the room suddenly became too thick to breathe. The tension that had been building between us all night, pulling tightly like a drawn bowstring, finally snapped. Asher leaned down. His lips touched mine. It wasn't a forceful, aggressive kiss. It was devastatingly soft, a brief, gentle press of his lips against mine that sent a violent shockwave of electricity straight down my spine. The heat of it exploded in my chest, a sudden, blinding rush of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated want. My breath hitched, my eyes fluttering shut as my hand instinctively reached up, my fingers brushing against the soft fabric of his turtleneck. But just as quickly as it started, it ended. Asher pulled back abruptly, inhaling a sharp, jagged breath. He stood up so fast he almost knocked over the small trash bin. I stared up at him, my eyes wide open now, my lips tingling and my heart hammering a frantic, deafening beat against my ribs. He didn't look at me. The vulnerability and softness had vanished entirely, replaced by the impenetrable, icy wall he used to keep the world at bay. He reached over and aggressively yanked my blanket up, throwing it over my chest. "Go to sleep, Leo," Asher said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. You just kissed me." I breathed out, my mind reeling. "No, I didn't," he replied instantly, his tone freezing cold. He turned his back on me, walking briskly toward his side of the room. "You're half asleep and exhausted. You imagined it. It was just a dream." Before I could say another word, he flicked the light switch, plunging the room into absolute darkness. I lay there in the pitch black, staring blankly at the ceiling, my chest heaving. It wasn't a dream. I could still feel the phantom pressure of his lips on mine, the lingering scent of cedarwood wrapped around my senses. I knew exactly what had happened, and lying there in the dark, I realized that Asher Vance was terrified of it. When I woke up the next morning, my head was pounding with a dull, heavy ache. The exhaustion from the night before, combined with the sheer emotional whiplash of Asher's kiss and subsequent denial, made me feel like I had been hit by a truck. I groaned, pulling the blanket over my eyes, trying to block out the bright morning sunlight streaming through the window. "Drink this." I flinched, pulling the blanket down. Asher was standing beside my bed, fully dressed in a sharp gray sweater, holding a steaming ceramic mug. His face was a blank mask, completely unreadable, as if the earth-shattering moment between us the night before had truly been a figment of my imagination. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, eyeing the mug suspiciously. "What is it?" "Poison." Asher snorted softly, setting the mug on my nightstand. "If I wanted to kill you, Leo, I wouldn't waste perfectly good tea to do it. It's for the hangover." "I didn't drink alcohol last night," I pointed out, my voice thick with sleep. "You have a fatigue headache." "Drink it," he ordered, turning away and walking back to his desk. I hesitantly picked up the mug. It smelled like peppermint, ginger, and something earthy. I took a small sip. It was surprisingly soothing, the warm liquid immediately easing the dull throb in my temples. "This is really good. Where did you get this?" "My grandmother taught me how to brew it," he said quietly, not looking up from his laptop. The domesticity of the moment was so jarring compared to his cold denial last night that my brain struggled to keep up. I took another sip, my eyes sleepily drifting toward the digital clock on his desk. The bright red numbers read, 8:45 a.m. My blood ran completely cold. "Oh my God!" I shrieked, practically launching myself out of the bed, the blanket tangling around my legs. "My presentation. I have my midterm literature presentation at 9. Asher raised a dark eyebrow, mildly amused by my panic. "Then you should probably get dressed. Why didn't you wake me up?" I yelled, sprinting into the bathroom and aggressively scrubbing a toothbrush against my teeth. "You looked like you needed the sleep," Asher replied calmly through the door. I threw on the first clean shirt I could find, grabbed my heavy backpack, and practically flew toward the door. I was entirely frantic, my mind racing through my notes as I yanked the doorknob open. "Leo." I paused, looking back over my shoulder. Asher was watching me, his icy gray eyes intense and unreadable. "Good luck," he murmured. I swallowed hard, my heart doing a stupid, traitorous flip in my chest. "Thanks," I managed to squeak out before bolting down the hallway, leaving the enigma and the heavy, confusing reality of what was happening between us behind in room 308. End of Part 4. Part 5. I practically flew across the campus courtyard, my heavy boots slapping against the damp pavement as I dodged groups of students casually strolling to their morning classes. My lungs burned with the crisp autumn air, but I didn't dare slow down. I burst through the heavy double doors of the Humanities building and scrambled into my lecture hall at exactly 8:59 a.m., chest heaving and hair entirely disheveled. I barely had time to drop my bag at a desk before the professor called my name. I took a deep, steadying breath, walked down to the podium, and pulled up my slides on 19th century literature. I thought the hardest part of the morning would be analyzing the tragic flaws of Gothic protagonists on less than 4 hours of sleep. I was wrong. About 5 minutes into my presentation, I started to notice it. The lecture hall, which was usually filled with bored, half-asleep students, was entirely awake. But they weren't looking at my slides. They were looking at me. I saw a girl in the second row lean over to her friend, her hand shielding her mouth as she whispered something urgently. The friend's eyes widened, and her gaze snapped to me, scanning me from head to toe with a mixture of shock and blatant curiosity. In the back row, a group of upperclassmen were openly pointing in my direction, their phones out under their desks, clearly texting in group chats. Even over the sound of my own voice, the low, persistent hum of whispering began to fill the room like a swarm of bees. Is that really him? I heard Asher Vance literally carried him out of the gallery. No way. Asher doesn't let anyone touch him. They say he practically claimed the guy in front of Victoria. Look at his neck. Is he marked? My throat went entirely dry. I gripped the edges of the wooden podium so hard my knuckles turned white. The rumor mill hadn't just churned. It had exploded overnight. The events of the underground party, Asher holding my hand, staring down Victoria, and carrying me home, had already become campus legend. And in the center of that massive, terrifying spotlight was me. I forced myself to keep speaking, pushing through the agonizing 20 minutes of my presentation with sheer, panicked willpower. When I finally finished, and the professor nodded in approval, I practically sprinted back to my seat, keeping my eyes glued to my notebook for the rest of the hour to avoid the suffocating weight of 100 staring eyes. When the class was finally dismissed, I waited until the room was mostly empty before packing my bag. I felt mentally and physically drained. All I wanted was to crawl back into my bed in room 308 and hide from the world. But the universe had other plans. As I stepped out of the heavy glass doors of the building and into the cool morning air, 3 figures suddenly stepped out from the shadows of the courtyard pillars, completely blocking my path. I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing in the center was Victoria. Even in the harsh daylight, she looked impossibly flawless. She wore a tailored cream coat over a dark dress, her dark hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. The 2 girls flanking her looked at me with matching expressions of mild hostility, but Victoria's eyes were cold, sharp, and laced with absolute venom. "You're Leo, right?" she asked. Her voice was smooth, carrying that same cloying, honeyed tone she had used on Asher the night before. I shifted my grip on my backpack strap, my instincts screaming at me to walk away. "Yes. Can I help you?" Victoria took a slow step forward, her green eyes scanning me up and down as if trying to calculate my exact worth. She clearly found it lacking. "So, you're Asher's new little roommate project." "I'm his roommate," I corrected, my voice steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. "If you have a problem with what happened last night, you should talk to him." One of her friends let out a harsh, condescending scoff. "Oh, please. Don't act so innocent. The whole school saw him holding your hand." "That didn't mean anything," I said quickly, perhaps a bit too defensively. The memory of Asher's thumb brushing my knuckles under the table flashed in my mind, making my chest tighten. Victoria sighed softly, a deeply patronizing sound, as if she genuinely pitied me. "You really don't know how he operates, do you?" I frowned, taking a half-step back. "What do you mean?" Victoria tilted her head, her perfectly manicured fingers adjusting the lapel of her coat. "I used to be Asher's girlfriend," she stated, the bitterness in her voice finally breaking through the sweet facade. "At least, that's what he let me believe." My breath hitched. My mind immediately flashed back to Asher's flat, terrifyingly cold voice telling her to leave his table. "Asher has a habit," Victoria continued, her green eyes locking onto mine with an intense, unsettling sincerity. "He gets bored easily. He lives in his own cold little world, and the moment he sees someone who doesn't immediately fall at his feet, he sees it as a challenge. He pursues them. He acts protective. He says all the right things, does all the right things, and makes you feel like you're the only person in the entire world who can break through his ice." My stomach plummeted. The words hit a little too close to home. I thought about the way he had pulled me out of the way of the trash can, the way he hovered over my bed, the heart-stopping kiss that he had immediately, coldly denied. "He did the exact same thing to me," Victoria said, her voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "He chased me relentlessly. He brought me to his exclusive events. He made me think I was special. And the very second I finally gave in and fell for him, she let out a dry, humorless laugh. He dropped me like I was absolutely nothing. He stopped answering my calls, acted like we were strangers, and completely humiliated me in front of everyone. Silence fell heavily between us. The campus bustled around us, students rushing to classes, completely unaware of the invisible knife Victoria was slowly twisting into my chest. She took one final step closer, leaning in so that her suffocating floral perfume overwhelmed my senses. He's using you to prove a point, Leo. He loves the chase, but he doesn't know how to keep anything. Take my advice. Leave before you fall too deep, because when he breaks you, he won't even look back. With that final, devastating warning, Victoria and her friends turned and walked away, their heels clicking sharply against the pavement. I stood there frozen for a long time, the cold autumn wind biting through my clothes. My chest felt hollow, echoing with her words. Leave before you fall too deep. By the time I finally returned to room 308 that evening, the sun had already set. I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting the room to be empty. It wasn't. The warm, incredibly savory scent of roasted garlic, herbs, and seared meat filled the air. Asher was standing near a small, high-end electric hot plate he must have brought in, casually stirring something in a pan. He was dressed down in soft gray sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt, his dark hair messy, making him look dangerously approachable. He glanced over his shoulder as I walked in. "You're back." "Yeah," I muttered, dropping my bag on the floor and aggressively avoiding his gaze. "I made extra," Asher said, his voice surprisingly neutral. "Sit. You barely ate yesterday." Normally, I would have been shocked. The untouchable enigma, the guy who commanded underground galleries and terrified the student body, was cooking dinner for me. But all I could hear was Victoria's voice in my head. "He acts protective. He makes you feel special. Then he drops you." "I'm not hungry," I lied, my voice sounding flat and distant even to my own ears. I walked straight to my bed, grabbed a thick literature textbook, and sat down with my back facing his side of the room. I opened the book, staring blankly at the words without actually reading a single sentence. The soft sizzling in the pan stopped. The silence in the room stretched, growing thick and heavy. I could feel Asher's eyes burning into my back. "Leo," he said, his tone dropping into that low, commanding register that usually made my spine tingle. I didn't turn around. I forcefully flipped a page in my textbook. "I have a lot of reading to catch up on, Asher. I'm just tired." For a long, agonizing minute, neither of us moved. The electric tension in the air shifted from magnetic to painfully suffocating. Finally, I heard the scrape of a chair. Asher ate in absolute silence, and for the rest of the evening, we didn't exchange a single word. He didn't push, but the heavy, dark aura radiating from his side of the room told me he was acutely aware of the sudden wall I had built between us. Lying in bed that night, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of Asher breathing in the dark, I made a decision. Victoria was right. The kiss he denied, the sudden shifts from possessive heat to freezing indifference, I was just a game to him. I couldn't survive being Asher Vance's temporary project. The next morning, I woke up an hour earlier than usual. I quietly packed my backpack, careful not to make a sound, determined to slip out of the room before Asher woke up. I grabbed my jacket and reached for the doorknob. A large, warm hand clamped down firmly over my wrist. I gasped, spinning around. Asher was standing right behind me. He wasn't wearing a shirt, his broad, incredibly defined chest inches from my face, his hair messy from sleep. But his gray eyes were entirely alert, narrowed, and burning with a dark, intense frustration. "Why are you avoiding me?" he demanded, his voice a rough, sleep-heavy rumble. I tried to pull my wrist away, but his grip was like iron, not painful, but impossible to break. "I'm not," I lied, refusing to meet his eyes. "I just have an early study group." "Look at me and say that again," Asher challenged, stepping closer. His signature scent of cedar and dark rain wrapped around me, nearly crumbling my resolve on the spot. "Let me go, Asher," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. He stared at me for a long, agonizing second, searching my face for an answer I refused to give him. A flash of something that looked dangerously like hurt crossed his features before his jaw clenched, and he slowly released my wrist. "Fine," he said coldly, stepping back and letting the icy wall drop between us once more. I practically bolted out the door. For the rest of the day, I was on a mission. I cornered a guy from my study group, a chatty junior named Carter, during lunch. "Carter, Do you know anyone looking to switch dorms? I asked quietly. Even just for a few days? Carter looked at me like I had grown a second head. Switch dorms? In the middle of the semester? Are you kidding? I just need a change of scenery, I pleaded. Carter let out a nervous laugh, shaking his head. Bro, everyone knows you live with Vance. After the stunt he pulled at the gallery last night, half the school thinks he marked you as his property. Nobody is going to willingly walk into room 308 and tell Vance to his face that they're his new roommate. They'd end up thrown out a window. My shoulders slumped. The rumor was everywhere. It felt like I was trapped in a cage Asher had built without me even realizing it. I spent the entire afternoon texting every acquaintance I had, posting subtly on campus forums. Every response was a variation of the same terrified rejection. No way. Not messing with Vance. You're on your own. I was sitting on a bench outside the library, feeling utterly defeated, when my phone buzzed. It was a direct message from a guy named Liam in my history class. He was a quiet introvert who lived in a single room on the opposite side of campus. Liam, hey. I heard you're looking to swap. I don't really want trouble with Vance, but I'm going out of town for a family thing in a few days anyway. If you just need my room for 4 days, we can swap keys. Relief washed over me so intensely that I almost cried. Yes, I typed back rapidly. 4 days is perfect. Thank you. It was just a temporary fix, but it was enough. It was an escape. I would pack my essentials tonight, leave while Asher was out, and figure out the rest of my life later. I wouldn't let myself become another one of his broken toys. I stood up from the bench, bracing myself for what I had to do. I had to go back to room 308 one last time. End of part 5. Part 6. The walk back to the dormitory felt like marching toward my own execution. The autumn sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the campus courtyard, but I barely noticed the chill in the air. My mind was entirely consumed by the heavy, suffocating anxiety twisting in my chest. All I needed to do was slip into room 308, grab my duffel bag, throw my toothbrush and a few changes of clothes inside, and leave. Liam was waiting for me at the library to hand over his keys. It was a flawless plan. I would be out of Asher Vance's life, out of his dangerous, manipulative game, before he even realized I was gone. But as I stepped onto the 3rd floor of the residence hall, my steps began to slow. The hallway was unusually quiet, the typical sounds of college students playing music or yelling across the hall completely absent. And then I smelled it. Even before I reached the door of room 308, the scent hit me. It was Asher's signature scent, rich cedarwood, dark rain, and embers, but it was magnified by 100. It was no longer the faint, alluring aroma that lingered on his jackets. It was thick, heavy, and wildly aggressive. It felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest, making my pulse instantly spike and a strange, primal heat flare up at the base of my neck. My hand trembled as I pushed my key into the lock. I twisted it, pushing the heavy wooden door open. The moment I stepped inside, the heat in the room practically knocked me backward. It was sweltering, the air so thick with pure Enigma pheromones that it felt like breathing in invisible smoke. The sheer intensity of it made my knees feel suspiciously weak, my instincts screaming at me in a language I was struggling to ignore. My eyes frantically scanned the dimly lit room, landing on the pristine right side. Asher was lying on his bed, but he didn't look like the untouchable, perfectly composed ice prince of the architecture department. He was an absolute wreck. He was wearing only a pair of dark sweatpants, his chest bare and glistening with a heavy sheen of sweat. His broad shoulders were tense, the muscles in his arms corded tightly as his hands gripped the charcoal-gray bedsheets with white-knuckled desperation, practically tearing the fabric. His chest heaved with shallow, jagged breaths, and his eyes were squeezed shut in obvious agony. Realization hit me like a bucket of ice water, completely overriding my panic. Asher was in his rut. I had read about enigmas in my biology and sociology electives. They were incredibly rare, possessing a dominant biology that put them at the very top of the campus hierarchy. But that dominance came with a devastating price. Their cycles were volatile, violently intense, and physically agonizing if they went through them alone. The pheromones he was releasing weren't just territorial, they were a blind, desperate cry for relief. I stood frozen in the doorway, my duffel bag slipping from my shoulder and hitting the floor with a soft thud. The sound was tiny, but in the heavy silence of the room, it echoed like a gunshot. Asher's eyes snapped open. The icy, composed gray I was used to was entirely gone, replaced by a dark, blown-out pupil that swallowed his irises whole. His gaze locked onto me, feral and blazing with a heat that made my heart stop entirely. With a low, rough groan, he pushed himself up from the bed. His movements were sluggish, completely stripped of his usual fluid grace, but his focus was terrifyingly absolute. He stumbled forward, crossing the invisible boundary that divided our room for the very first time. "Leo," he rasped. His voice was completely ruined, a deep, gravelly vibration that tore through the air and settled directly in my bones. Instinct told me to run. Victoria's warning screamed in my head. "Leave before you fall too deep." I took a frantic step backward, my hand reaching for the doorknob. I just came to get my things. I'm leaving, Asher." Before my fingers could even graze the metal knob, Asher closed the distance between us. His large, scorching hot hand shot out, wrapping securely around my wrist. The contrast of his burning skin against mine sent a violent jolt of electricity straight through my nervous system. "No," he breathed out, his chest heaving as he loomed over me. The sheer force of his pheromones was intoxicating, wrapping around my mind and dragging me under. "Don't." I tried to pull my arm away, desperately fighting against the magnetic pull he had on me. "Let me go. You can't keep doing this to me," I yelled, the frustration and hurt from the past 24 hours finally boiling over. "You can't kiss me, pretend it didn't happen, and then expect me to just stand here and be your little toy." Asher flinched. The feral, clouded look in his eyes cracked, revealing a sudden, raw vulnerability that completely threw me off balance. His grip on my wrist loosened slightly, though he didn't let go entirely. He leaned his forehead against the heavy wooden door right next to my head, exhaling a shaky, burning breath against my cheek. "Why are you leaving?" he asked, his voice so quiet, so desperately broken, that it shattered the cold image I had of him. "Why are you looking at me like you're afraid of me?" "Because of Victoria," I blurted out, unable to hold it in any longer. My chest tightened painfully. "She told me everything, Asher. Why didn't you tell me she was your girlfriend? Why didn't you tell me you have a habit of making people fall for you just to break them? I'm not going to be your next project. I've already arranged to swap dorms with someone. I'm leaving tonight." The moment the words left my mouth, Asher froze completely. The suffocating heat in the room seemed to stall. He slowly lifted his head, his dark, hazy eyes clearing just enough to process what I had said. The change in his expression was immediate and devastating. For the first time since I had met him, the terrifying enigma looked absolutely terrified. "Victoria," he repeated, his voice laced with pure, unfiltered disgust. "She told you she was my girlfriend?" "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling. "She lied," Asher stated, the words leaving his mouth with heavy, absolute certainty. He shifted his grip, his hand sliding down from my wrist to perfectly interlock his long fingers with mine, pressing my palm against the door. "Leo, listen to me. I never dated her. I never touched her. She hovered around me because she wanted the status of my family's name. She's manipulative, and the moment I publicly rejected her, she made it her mission to ruin anyone who got close to me." I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. "But the kiss. Last night. You denied it. You said I imagined it. You treated me like I was nothing." Asher closed his eyes, a look of profound pain crossing his sharp features. When he opened them again, the walls he had built around himself for years came crashing down entirely. "Because I was terrified," he confessed, the rough vulnerability in his voice making my heart ache. "I have spent my entire life keeping everyone at a distance. People only ever want something from me, my money, my status, my influence. Caring about someone is dangerous. It gives them the power to destroy you." He stepped closer, eliminating the last fraction of space between us. His free hand came up, his warm, slightly trembling fingers gently cupping my jaw. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone with a reverence that made my breath hitch. "But then you walked into this room," Asher whispered, his gaze dropping to my lips before rising back to meet my eyes with a burning intensity. "You didn't care who I was. You yelled at me for being rude. You rolled your eyes at my money. You made me feel human." My heart was hammering so wildly, I thought it might break through my ribs. The thick, intoxicating scent of cedar and embers was no longer suffocating. It was wrapping around me like a warm, fiercely protective blanket. "I denied the kiss because I realized how deeply I was already falling," Asher admitted, his voice barely a breath against my skin. "I thought if I pushed you away, I could protect us both. But seeing you pack your bag," hearing you say you're leaving." His hand tightened in mine, a desperate, anchoring grip. "I can't let you go, Leo. I can't." The remaining doubt in my chest evaporated entirely, burned away by the raw, undeniable truth in his eyes. He wasn't playing a game. He was just a guy who was terrified of getting hurt, completely losing his mind over a sophomore in an oversized sweater. "I'm not Victoria," I whispered softly, my own hand coming up to rest flat against his bare, burning chest. I could feel the frantic, chaotic beating of his heart under my palm. "I know," he breathed out, leaning into my touch. "And I'm not leaving," I added, my voice steady, solidifying my choice. Asher let out a sound that was half a gasp, half a heavy sigh of absolute relief. The tension that had been driving him mad broke entirely. He didn't hesitate this time. He didn't hold back. He leaned down and captured my lips with his. The kiss was nothing like the soft, fleeting touch from the night before. This was a culmination of days of agonizing tension, misunderstandings, and pure, raw want. It was consuming. Asher's mouth moved against mine with a desperate, passionate heat that sent a shockwave of electricity through my entire body. My back was pressed flush against the door, his large body caging me imperfectly. I let go of my bag entirely, my hands tangling in his dark, messy hair, pulling him even closer. He tasted like peppermint tea and something dangerously intoxicating. A soft, involuntary noise escaped my throat, and Asher swallowed it completely, his tongue sweeping into my mouth to deepen the kiss. His hands roamed over my back, gripping my waist with that same terrifyingly possessive strength from the night I tripped over his trash can. Only this time, there was no cold warning to accompany it. We kissed until my lungs were burning, until the entire world outside of room 308 simply ceased to exist. When he finally pulled back to breathe, his forehead rested heavily against mine. His chest was heaving, his dark eyes entirely blown out, completely lost in his instincts. "Leo," he murmured, his breath hot against my lips. "Let me." I didn't need to ask what he meant. The heavy, throbbing heat of his pheromones, the primal way his gaze dragged down to the exposed skin of my neck. I knew exactly what he was asking for. In the Enigma world, it was the ultimate promise. A claim that meant safety, protection, and absolute devotion. I tilted my head back, exposing the frantic pulse beating at the base of my throat, completely surrendering to the campus enigma. "Yes." Asher let out a low, rough growl of pure affection. He buried his face into the crook of my neck, his nose brushing against my skin, inhaling deeply as if my scent was the only oxygen left in the room. Then, he opened his mouth and pressed his lips firmly against my pulse point. I braced for pain, but there was none. Instead, it was a sharp, intense pressure, a gentle, incredibly intimate bite that sent a rush of absolute warmth flooding through my veins. It felt like a tether snapping into place, binding us together in a way that words never could. My fingers dug into his broad shoulders as the heat washed over me, a quiet, fiery promise that Asher Vance would never let me fall again. End of Part 6. Part 7. Waking up the next morning was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. Before I even opened my eyes, my senses were entirely flooded with the rich, soothing aroma of cedarwood, dark rain, and a lingering warmth that felt like a thick, protective blanket wrapped securely around my soul. The aggressive, suffocating heat of the Enigma pheromones from the night before had completely vanished, replaced by a calm, steady rhythm that synced perfectly with the beating of my own heart. I shifted slightly, burying my face deeper into the incredibly soft, charcoal gray sheets. Wait, charcoal gray. My eyes fluttered open. I wasn't on my side of the room. I was tangled in the expensive sheets of Asher's immaculate bed. But more than that, I was completely trapped. A heavy, muscular arm was draped securely over my waist, pulling me flush against a solid, incredibly warm chest. Asher's legs were tangled with mine, his chin resting softly on top of my head. He was holding me like I was a lifeline he was terrified of losing. I held my breath, slowly tilting my head up to look at him. He was already awake. His icy gray eyes, usually so sharp and impenetrable, were soft, clear, and focused entirely on me. The moment our eyes met, a profound sense of peace settled in my chest, completely washing away the chaotic anxiety of the past few days. "Good morning," Asher murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent a pleasant shiver down my spine. "Morning," I whispered back, my voice thick with sleep. He didn't move his arm from my waist. Instead, his free hand slowly came up, his long fingers gently brushing my messy hair away from my forehead. His thumb traced a soft line down my jaw, before finally coming to rest against the side of my neck, right where the mark was. Even the lightest touch of his fingers against the bite sent a rush of absolute heat flooding through my veins. It didn't hurt. It felt like a quiet, humming energy that tethered me directly to him. Asher's eyes darkened slightly as his thumb brushed over it, a look of profound, possessive satisfaction washing over his sharp features. "You're still here," he said quietly, almost as if he needed to confirm it out loud. I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. I shifted closer, resting my hand against his chest, right over his heart. "I told you I wasn't leaving." Asher let out a soft exhale, the tension bleeding completely out of his broad shoulders. He leaned down, pressing a lingering, incredibly tender kiss to my forehead. "I'm going to make sure you never want to." Getting out of bed proved to be an impossible task. For a guy who was known across campus for being an untouchable, ice-cold enigma, Asher Vance was shockingly clingy in private. Every time I tried to sit up to grab my clothes for my morning classes, his arm would simply tighten around my waist, dragging me right back against his chest. "Asher, come on," I laughed, pushing half-heartedly against his shoulder. "I have a seminar in 40 minutes. I need to shower." "Skip it," he mumbled into my neck, his lips brushing against my pulse point. "I'll email your professor. Tell them you have a sudden, severe allergy to 19th century poetry." "I am an English literature major," I reminded him, my heart doing a stupidly happy flip at how domestic and entirely out of character he was acting. "I can't just skip. Besides, don't you have some high-level architecture studio to dominate today?" Asher sighed heavily, the sound vibrating against my skin. He finally, reluctantly, loosened his grip, allowing me to sit up. "Fine, but I'm walking you to class." When we finally managed to get dressed and ready, the reality of the situation began to settle over me. Inside room 308, we were safe in our own little bubble. But outside that heavy wooden door was a campus filled with thousands of students, rumor mills, and people like Victoria who were waiting for any sign of weakness. I nervously adjusted the collar of my oversized beige sweater, trying to make sure it sat high enough to cover the mark on my neck. I wasn't ashamed of it, not even slightly, but the thought of dealing with the staring and whispering again made my stomach twist into knots. Asher noticed. He stepped up behind me as I looked in the small mirror, his hands coming to rest firmly on my shoulders. He caught my eye in the reflection. "Don't hide," Asher said quietly, his voice carrying that undeniable tone of authority. "You have nothing to be afraid of, Leo. Not anymore. If anyone so much as looks at you the wrong way, they deal with me." I took a deep breath, letting my hands fall away from my collar. The faint, reddish crescent of the mark was just barely visible above the knit fabric. I nodded. "Okay." The moment we stepped out of the residence hall, the shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. Asher didn't just walk beside me. The second the heavy glass doors of the dorm building closed behind us, his hand confidently found mine. He interlaced our fingers, his grip firm and unyielding, effectively announcing to the entire world that I was his. The morning courtyard was bustling with students, and the reaction was like watching a wave ripple across a pond. Conversations abruptly stopped. People holding coffee cups froze in place. I could practically hear the collective gasp echoing across the brick pathways. The Asher Vance, the terrifying campus enigma who was rumored to hate physical contact, was openly holding hands with a sophomore in an oversized sweater. And he wasn't just holding my hand. His entire demeanor was different. He usually walked with a cold, intimidating rigidity that made people scramble out of his way. Today, while he still possessed that lethal grace, his shoulders were relaxed, and he kept subtly leaning into my space, his thumb continuously stroking the back of my hand. I kept my head down at first, my cheeks burning with a furious blush. But then I felt Asher's grip tighten protectively. I lifted my chin, forcing myself to ignore the whispers. We walked into the campus dining hall to grab breakfast, and it felt like walking onto a movie set right after the director yelled action. Every single head turned. "Over there," Asher murmured, completely ignoring the staring crowds as he guided me toward a booth in the back corner. Sitting at the booth were Tristan and Julian. Tristan was mid-bite of a bagel when he saw us approaching. He completely froze, his bright blue eyes widening to comical proportions. He slowly lowered the bagel, his gaze dropping to our intertwined hands, and then snapping up to my neck. Julian pushed his silver-rimmed glasses up his nose, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. Well, good morning. Asher slid into the booth first, pulling me in right next to him. Our thighs pressed together beneath the table, and he immediately threw his arm casually over the back of the booth, his hand resting securely on the nape of my neck. His thumb brushed over the mark, a blatant, silent warning to his friends. "I don't believe it," Tristan breathed out, looking like he had just witnessed a miracle. He actually did it. The Ice King has officially fallen. "Tristan," Asher warned, his voice low but lacking its usual lethal edge. No, I am celebrating," Tristan laughed, raising his coffee cup toward me. "Welcome to the inner circle, Leo. I have to admit, I didn't think you'd survive the weekend. Yet here you are, completely taming the beast." "I didn't tame anyone," I muttered, my face incredibly warm, though I couldn't stop a small smile from breaking through. "He's just clingy." Tristan choked on his coffee. Julian let out a rare, genuine laugh. "Clingy," Tristan wheezed, wiping his mouth. "Asher Vance, the guy who once moved an entire desk to the hallway because his old roommate breathed too loudly." Asher simply glared at them, completely unfazed, his thumb continuing its slow, rhythmic stroke against my neck. "If you two are done being obnoxious, I have to get Leo to his seminar." The rest of the day passed in a surreal, wonderful blur. Asher walked me all the way to the door of my literature building. Despite the crowd of students milling around the hallway, waiting for the lecture doors to open, Asher didn't hesitate. He pulled me close by the waist, leaned down, and kissed me softly, right there in the open. The entire hallway went dead silent. When he pulled away, his gray eyes were bright with a fiercely protective warmth. "I'll pick you up at noon. We'll get lunch off campus." I nodded, my heart soaring so high I thought I might float away. "Okay, see you at noon." As I walked into the classroom and took my seat, I could feel the stares burning into me, but this time, the anxiety was completely gone. The rumors didn't matter anymore. Victoria's venomous warnings felt like a distant, irrelevant nightmare. I was securely anchored by the lingering heat of Asher's mark and the undeniable truth of how he looked at me. During the lecture, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I sneaked a glance under the desk. It was a message from Liam. "Liam, hey Leo, really sorry, but my family thing got canceled. I can't swap dorms anymore. Let me know if you're okay." I smiled softly to myself, my fingers flying over the screen. "Leo, don't worry about it at all, Liam. I don't need to swap anymore. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The next few weeks fell into a quiet, beautiful routine. The initial shock of the campus eventually died down, replacing the vicious rumors with a kind of awed respect. No one dared to bother me, knowing that breathing in my direction the wrong way would summon the wrath of the architecture department's most terrifying enigma. Our life inside room 308 transformed entirely. The invisible boundary line that once divided the room was completely erased. Asher's pristine minimalist side was slowly infiltrated by my scattered literature books, my beige pillows, and my absolute refusal to fold my laundry perfectly. Instead of getting angry, Asher simply started doing it for me, quietly organizing my chaos with a fond, exasperated sigh. We studied together, cooked together, and every night, I fell asleep completely wrapped in his arms, the scent of cedar and embers acting as the ultimate shield against the world. I thought we had finally found our perfect peace. I thought the drama was entirely behind us. But I had forgotten one crucial detail about Asher Vance. He didn't just belong to the campus. He belonged to one of the most powerful, elite families in the country. It was a rainy Thursday evening. Asher was sitting at his drafting table, working on a complex architectural model, while I was curled up on his bed reading a novel. The atmosphere was peaceful, warm, and entirely domestic. Then his phone rang. It wasn't his usual ringtone. It was a sharp, piercing sound that immediately made Asher freeze. His hand hovered over the drafting paper, his broad shoulders suddenly tensing into hard lines. The warm, comforting scent in the room instantly turned sharp and cold, like a winter storm rolling in over the mountains. He stared at the caller ID for a long, heavy second before finally picking it up. "Mother," Asher answered, his voice dropping back into that flat, icy register I hadn't heard since the night of the gallery party. I lowered my book, my heart suddenly beating a little faster as I watched the tension radiating from him. He listened for a moment, his jaw clenching so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. "I told you I wasn't attending the winter gala this year. I have final projects." A pause. The voice on the other end was sharp, though I couldn't make out the words. I don't care about the board's expectations, Asher snapped, his icy eyes flickering over to me, a sudden flash of panic breaking through his cold facade. I'm not bringing anyone. I'm not going. Whatever his mother said next made the color completely drain from Asher's face. He fell dead silent. His grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. Fine, Asher finally forced out, his voice practically shaking with restrained fury. I'll be there. He hung up, slamming the phone onto the desk with enough force to crack the screen. He stood there, his back to me, taking deep, jagged breaths as the overwhelming scent of distressed Enigma pheromones flooded the room. I carefully set my book aside and walked over to him, gently wrapping my arms around his waist from behind, pressing my cheek against his rigid back. Asher, what's wrong? He turned around, pulling me into a crushing embrace, burying his face into my neck and inhaling deeply over the mark. He held me so tightly it almost hurt. They know about you, Asher whispered roughly, his voice laced with a genuine, terrifying fear I had never heard from him before. My family knows about you, Leo, and they just ordered me to bring you to the gala. End of Part 7. Part 8. They know about you, Asher whispered roughly, his voice laced with a genuine, terrifying fear I had never heard from him before. My family knows about you, Leo, and they just ordered me to bring you to the gala. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, instantly chilling the warm domesticity we had built inside room 308. I stood frozen, my arms still wrapped around his waist, feeling the violent tension locked in his muscles. I didn't know much about the Vance family, but what I did know was enough to make my stomach turn. They were legacy billionaires, the kind of family that owned skyscrapers, influenced politicians, and operated with a ruthless, calculated coldness. They were the very reason Asher had built an impenetrable fortress of ice around himself. They didn't see people. They saw assets, liabilities, and pawns on a chessboard. And suddenly, I had just been placed on the board. Asher, I said softly, stepping around to face him. I reached up, placing my hands on his tense shoulders. Look at me. He slowly lifted his head. The usually composed, lethal Enigma looked completely unraveled. His piercing gray eyes were dark with panic, and the scent of distressed cedar and burning embers was so thick it made my head spin. He reached out, gripping my hips with white-knuckled desperation, pulling me flush against him as if he were trying to physically shield me from an invisible threat. I won't let them touch you, he swore, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through my chest. I'll decline. I'll cut off their funding to the university. I'll drop out. I'll do whatever it takes. I am not letting my mother drag you into her toxic games. No, I replied firmly, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. You can't do that. If you suddenly rebel and cut ties because of me, it's only going to prove to them that I'm a liability. It will make me a target. They'll try to get rid of me. Asher's jaw clenched so tightly a muscle ticked violently in his cheek. He knew I was right. In the world of high society and billions of dollars, a college sophomore in thrifted sweaters was an insect they could easily crush if they felt I was ruining their perfect heir. We'll go, I continued, sliding my hands up to cup his face, my thumbs gently brushing his sharp cheekbones. I forced a reassuring smile, projecting as much calm as I could muster. It's just one night. A fancy dinner, some terrible small talk, and then we leave. I can handle it. I can handle them. Asher closed his eyes, leaning heavily into my touch. You don't know my mother, Leo, he whispered, a profound exhaustion in his voice. Eleanor Vance doesn't do small talk. She dissects people. She will try to find every single insecurity you have and weaponize it. She wants me to marry an elite omega from a legacy family, someone who can merge corporations. Not a nobody who studies poetry and trips over trash cans? I supplied with a small, self-deprecating laugh. Asher's eyes snapped open, blazing with sudden, fierce heat. You are everything, he corrected sharply, his hands sliding up to grip the back of my neck, his thumb resting possessively over the mark he had given me. You are worth more than every single person in that ballroom combined. That's why I'm terrified. Because they ruin beautiful things, Leo. It's what they do. They won't ruin me, I promised, rising on my tiptoes to press a soft, lingering kiss to his lips. Because I have you. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of absolute chaos. Once Julian and Tristan found out about the gala summons, they immediately hijacked the operation. According to Tristan, letting me walk into a Vance family event wearing anything off the rack was equivalent to sending a sheep into a den of wolves covered in barbecue sauce. I found myself dragged off campus to an impossibly high-end boutique downtown, surrounded by velvet curtains and champagne flutes. The Vance family doesn't invite outsiders to galas to welcome them, Leo, Julian explained calmly as a tailor furiously pinned the hem of a dark fabric against my legs. Julian was sitting on a plush leather sofa, swirling a glass of sparkling water. They invite them to test them. Eleanor wants to see if you will crack under the pressure. If you show even a sliver of weakness, she will exploit it. Thank you, Julian. That's incredibly comforting, I muttered, trying not to breathe too deeply as the tailor measured my waist for the fourth time. He's just being a realist, Tristan chimed in, tossing a sleek, charcoal gray silk tie onto a nearby table. But don't worry, little Leo. By the time we're done with you, you're going to look like you own the entire building. The key to surviving elite society is simple. Look bored, act rich, and pretend everyone else is wasting your time. I don't think I can pull that off, I admitted, looking at my reflection in the massive three-way mirror. You won't have to, Asher's voice cut through the room. He stepped out of a private fitting area, and my brain completely short-circuited. I had seen Asher in casual clothes, in leather jackets, and in perfectly fitted sweaters, but seeing him in a bespoke black tuxedo was a spiritual experience. The sharp lines of the suit accentuated his broad shoulders and narrow waist, and the crisp white shirt contrasted beautifully with his dark, messy hair. He looked like royalty, cold, untouchable, and devastatingly handsome. He walked up behind me, resting his large hands on my waist, his icy gray eyes meeting mine in the mirror. You don't need to act like them, Asher murmured, entirely ignoring the tailor and his friends. You just need to stand next to me. I'll do the rest. When the night of the winter gala finally arrived, my nerves were completely fried. We sat in the back of a sleek, black town car that Asher had hired, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. I was wearing a bespoke, midnight blue suit that fit me so perfectly it felt like a second skin. It was paired with a black silk shirt, the top two buttons left undone to subtly reveal the faint, undeniable mark on my collarbone. It was Asher's request, a silent, aggressive statement to his family that I was already claimed. Asher hadn't let go of my hand since we left the dorm. His thumb traced nervous, repetitive circles against my knuckles. Despite his outward mask of icy composure, the overwhelming scent of distressed cedar filling the car told me exactly how anxious he was. It's going to be okay, I whispered, leaning my head against his shoulder. He turned his head, pressing a desperate kiss into my hair. Stay by my side. No matter what happens, do not let anyone separate us. I won't. The car rolled to a smooth stop in front of a sprawling, historic estate that looked more like a castle than a hotel. Valets were rushing around, and a line of incredibly expensive cars stretched down the block. As the driver opened the door, a flash of cameras momentarily blinded me. Society photographers were lined up behind velvet ropes, eagerly snapping pictures of the incoming elite. Asher stepped out first, his face instantly locking into an expression of absolute, terrifying coldness. He turned, offering me his hand. I took a deep breath, plastered what I hoped was a confident look on my face, and stepped out into the biting winter air. The moment the cameras registered who Asher was, and more importantly, that he was holding my hand, the flashing intensified to a blinding strobe. Reporters shouted questions, but Asher ignored them entirely. He pulled me close, his arm wrapping securely around my waist, acting as a physical shield as we walked up the marble steps and into the grand ballroom. If the underground gallery party was intimidating, this was suffocating. The ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers, gold leaf decorations, and hundreds of the wealthiest people in the country. The air was thick with expensive perfumes and the heavy, oppressive pheromones of powerful alphas and elite omegas. The reaction to our entrance was quieter than on campus, but infinitely more dangerous. There were no loud gasps or blatant pointing. Instead, there was a sudden, chilling drop in conversation. Eyes tracked us with sharp, calculating precision. Whispers were exchanged behind crystal champagne flutes and feathered fans. Keep your chin up, Asher murmured in my ear, his grip on my waist tightening. Ignore them. We hadn't even made it halfway across the room when the crowd suddenly parted, completely clearing a path as if Moses himself had arrived. My heart plummeted into my stomach. Walking toward us was a woman who commanded the room with terrifying ease. She was tall, dressed in a sweeping, silver evening gown that dripped in diamonds. Her hair was a flawless, icy blonde, pulled back into a severe updo. But it was her eyes that made my blood run cold. They were the exact same piercing, icy gray as Asher's, but they held absolutely no warmth, no vulnerability. Only pure, ruthless calculation. Eleanor Vance had arrived. She stopped a few feet in front of us. She didn't look at Asher. Her terrifying gaze locked entirely onto me, dissecting me layer by layer in a matter of seconds. "Asher," she said, her voice smooth, cultured, and entirely devoid of motherly affection. "You're late." "We arrived exactly when we intended to, Mother," Asher replied. His voice was a weapon, sharp and freezing cold. The scent of dark, aggressive embers rolled off him in waves, a clear, territorial warning. Eleanor finally shifted her gaze to her son, a small, condescending smile playing on her lips. "I see you brought a guest." Against my explicit instructions to attend with the Montgomery girl. "I am not interested in the Montgomery girl," Asher stated flatly. "This is Leo, my partner." Eleanor's eyes flicked back to me, zeroing in on the exposed skin of my neck. She noticed the mark instantly. I saw a micro-expression of pure fury flash across her composed face before it vanished, replaced by a terrifyingly pleasant smile. "Leo." She tested my name on her tongue like a bitter poison. How quaint. A literature major, if my background check serves me correctly. From a very modest background in the suburbs. My breath hitched. She had already investigated me. I forced myself to meet her icy gaze, refusing to shrink back. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance." "Oh, I'm sure it is," she replied smoothly, taking a step closer. The overwhelming scent of a dominant alpha rolled off her, completely contrasting Asher's. It must be quite a thrill to step inside a room like this. So overwhelming for someone unused to our world. "He's doing just fine," Asher growled, stepping slightly in front of me, his body rigid with fury. "If you only came over to insult him, we're leaving." "Don't be so dramatic, Asher," Eleanor sighed, waving a diamond-clad hand dismissively. She turned to me, her smile widening into something truly venomous. "I merely want to get to know the boy who has my son acting so entirely out of character. In fact," she gestured toward a set of heavy mahogany doors leading to a private conservatory. "I think Leo and I should have a little chat." "Privately?" Eleanor demanded, her tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. "Absolutely not," Asher snarled, his hand gripping mine so tightly it almost ached. "You are not taking him anywhere without me." The tension between them was explosive, drawing the silent, eager attention of the surrounding billionaires. Asher was ready to burn the entire ballroom to the ground to protect me. But I remembered what Julian had said. "She wants to see if you will crack." If I hid behind Asher now, she would win. She would label me a weak, pathetic liability, and she would never stop hunting us. I took a deep breath, gently squeezing Asher's hand. I sent a deliberate, soothing wave of my own calming pheromones toward him, hoping to cut through his blinding panic. I stepped out from behind his broad frame, standing tall in my midnight blue suit, and looked Eleanor Vance directly in the eyes. "It's okay, Asher," I said, my voice steady, loud enough for the hovering elite to hear. I offered the terrifying matriarch a polite, unwavering smile. "I would love to speak with your mother." End of Part 8. Part 9. Asher's grip on my hand tightened so violently that I almost winced. The heavy, suffocating aura of his enigma pheromones flared into a dark, aggressive warning, rolling across the marble floor of the ballroom and making the nearby socialites physically step back. He looked at me, his icy gray eyes wide with a frantic, desperate terror that he was failing to hide. "Leo, no," Asher breathed, his voice a harsh, jagged whisper meant only for me. "You don't know what you're walking into. I am not letting you go in there with her." I turned to face him fully, using my free hand to smooth a stray lock of dark hair away from his tense forehead. I kept my expression completely calm, projecting a quiet confidence I was struggling to actually feel. "5 minutes," I murmured softly, letting my thumb rest against his cheekbone. "Trust me, Asher. If I run from her now, she will never stop hunting us. She needs to know I'm not a liability you have to protect." Asher's jaw clenched, his eyes searching mine frantically for any sign of hesitation. The overwhelming scent of distressed cedar was breaking my heart, but I knew this was a battle I had to fight myself. Slowly, agonizingly, his grip on my hand loosened. 5 minutes, Asher snarled, his voice dropping an octave as his terrifying gaze snapped over my shoulder to his mother. "If that door doesn't open in exactly 5 minutes, I am tearing it off its hinges. Eleanor Vance offered a tight, patronizing smile, entirely unfazed by her son's lethal threat. She turned smoothly on her heel, her silver gown whispering against the floor, and glided toward the heavy mahogany doors. I took one last, deep breath, adjusted the cuffs of my midnight blue suit, and followed her. The moment the doors clicked shut behind me, the loud, oppressive chatter of the ballroom vanished, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. The conservatory was expansive, enclosed in towering walls of glass that looked out over the frost-covered gardens of the estate. The room was filled with rare, blooming orchids and bathed in the pale, cold light of the winter moon. The temperature inside was noticeably colder, perfectly matching the woman standing at the center of the room. Eleanor didn't offer me a seat. She didn't offer a drink. She turned to face me, and the pleasant, society smile vanished entirely, leaving behind a mask of absolute, chilling ruthlessness. "I will give you credit for one thing, Leo," Eleanor said, her voice sharp and echoing softly against the glass walls. "You have courage, or perhaps just the foolish ignorance of youth. It's difficult to tell with your kind." I stood tall, keeping my hands resting loosely at my sides so she couldn't see them trembling. "I'm not sure what you mean by my kind, Mrs. Vance." "People who believe love conquers reality," she stated flatly, pacing slowly like a predator circling its trapped prey. "Let's skip the exhausting pleasantries." I ran a background check the moment Asher rejected the Montgomery arrangement. "You are a sophomore, an English literature major heavily reliant on financial aid. Your parents are public school teachers in a forgettable suburb. You have absolutely nothing to offer the Vance empire." "I'm not trying to marry your empire," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm dating your son." Eleanor let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "My son is the empire. He is an enigma, born to inherit a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. His life is mapped out in boardrooms, international mergers, and alliances with legacy families. And you?" She stopped pacing, her piercing gray eyes locking onto mine with devastating precision. "You are a distraction, a fleeting rebellion. You are a shiny new toy he picked up to spite me because I pushed him too hard." The words stung, twisting like a cold knife in my chest, heavily echoing Victoria's warnings from weeks ago. But I knew Asher. I knew the way his heart raced against mine in the dark, the way he trembled when he kissed me, the way he looked at me like I was his entire world. "You think this is a phase," I said, my voice hardening. "I know it is," Eleanor countered smoothly. "Right now, the novelty of your mundane life is amusing to him. But what happens in 5 years, Leo? When he is forced to step down from the board because his partner doesn't have the social capital to host foreign dignitaries. When he loses half his inheritance because he defied the family trust. The resentment will build. He will look at you and see everything he gave up. He will end up hating you." She walked over to a small glass table and picked up a sleek black checkbook. She pulled an expensive fountain pen from her clutch. "I am a practical woman," Eleanor continued, her tone dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. "I don't waste time on drawn-out dramas. I will write a number on this piece of paper that will pay off your entire tuition, buy your parents a very comfortable home, and set you up for the rest of your life. In exchange, you will walk out the back door of this conservatory, get in a car, and you will never speak to my son again." She held the pen poised over the paper, raising a perfectly arched eyebrow at me. "How much, Leo? Name your price for his future." I looked at the checkbook. Then I looked at her. My fear entirely evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp clarity. My literature professors always told me to look for the subtext in a villain's monologue. I stared at Eleanor Vance, and I didn't see an untouchable, terrifying matriarch. I saw a desperate woman grasping at strings that were already slipping through her fingers. "You're not doing this to protect his future," I said quietly, the realization settling heavily in the cold room. Eleanor's hand paused. Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. You paid for the second bed in his dorm to remain empty," I continued, taking a slow step toward her. "You surrounded him with superficial socialites. You isolated him. You conditioned him to be this cold, untouchable machine because a machine is easy to control. A machine follows orders. A machine merges corporations without asking questions." Eleanor's posture stiffened, a flash of genuine fury breaking through her icy mask. "Watch your tone, boy." "But he's not a machine," I said, my voice rising with a quiet, undeniable strength. I reached up, pulling the collar of my silk shirt slightly aside, fully exposing the dark, bruised crescent of his mark on my collarbone. He is human, and the moment he had a choice, he didn't choose your legacy. He chose me. Eleanor stared at the mark, her lips parting in a silent, furious shock. You can threaten me, and you can wave your money in my face, I told her, my eyes locked on hers. But you know exactly why you're terrified. I'm not ruining his life. I'm breaking your control over it. And if you force him to choose between this toxic empire and the person who actually loves him, you are going to lose your son forever. The silence in the conservatory was deafening. Eleanor Vance looked at me, her chest heaving slightly, the realization that I could not be bought or intimidated finally dawning on her. Her eyes darkened with a terrifying, venomous rage. She opened her mouth to speak, the heavy scent of an angry alpha beginning to flood the room. Crack. The heavy mahogany doors didn't just open, they practically exploded inward, the brass locks splintering out of the wood and hitting the marble floor. Asher stood in the doorway, an absolute vision of lethal, terrifying fury. His eyes were completely black, blown out by the overwhelming surge of Enigma instincts. The scent of burning cedar crashed into the room like a physical shockwave, so heavy and oppressive that the glass walls of the conservatory actually seemed to vibrate. He wasn't the composed heir anymore. He was a predator who believed his mate was in danger. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides, entirely ignoring his mother, and grabbed my shoulders, his hands frantically roaming over my arms and neck to check for any sign of injury. "Leo," he rasped, his voice rough and panicked. "Are you okay? Did she touch you?" "I'm fine, Asher," I breathed out, instantly reaching up to cup his face, sending a desperate wave of calming pheromones toward him. "I'm perfectly fine. We were just talking." Asher's chest heaved under his bespoke tuxedo. He pulled me flush against his side, wrapping a protective arm securely around my waist. He finally turned his head to look at his mother, the look in his eyes promising absolute destruction. "Asher, your behavior is completely unacceptable," Eleanor snapped, though her voice wavered slightly under the crushing weight of his pheromones. "The board is just outside." "I don't care about the board," Asher roared, the sound vibrating violently through the quiet room. "I don't care about the money, the legacy, or this miserable family. If you ever try to corner him again, if you ever speak to him, look at him, or breathe in his direction, I will walk away from this empire and burn my shares to the ground." Eleanor paled, taking a small step back. She knew he wasn't bluffing. "We are leaving," Asher sneered, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Do not contact me again." Without waiting for a response, Asher turned, keeping me tightly tucked against his side, and marched us straight out of the shattered doors. We didn't stop in the ballroom. We didn't look at the staring billionaires or the flashing cameras outside. Asher practically shoved us into the back of our waiting town car, slamming the door shut with a violent crack. "Drive," he ordered the driver instantly. The car peeled away from the estate, leaving the glittering nightmare behind in the rearview mirror. Asher collapsed back against the leather seats, his hands trembling as the adrenaline crashed. He pulled me into his lap without a second thought, burying his face deep into the crook of my neck, right over his mark. He inhaled a shaky, desperate breath, wrapping both arms around me as if he were trying to merge our bodies together. I wrapped my arms around his broad shoulders, gently running my fingers through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up in the best way possible. "You're okay," I whispered softly into the dark car. "We're okay." Asher let out a choked sound, his grip on me tightening. When she took you in there, I thought she was going to break you. I thought you would realize how toxic this is and walk away." I leaned back slightly, forcing him to look at me. His icy eyes were wide, incredibly vulnerable, and filled with a profound, aching love. "I told you I'm not leaving," I said, a small, genuine smile breaking across my face. "Your mother offered me a blank check, and honestly, it was very insulting to my worth." Asher let out a wet, breathless laugh, his forehead dropping against mine. "What did you say to her, Leo?" "I just gave her a little literary analysis of a tragic villain," I murmured, leaning in to brush my lips softly against his. "And I told her she had already lost." Asher didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. He pulled me into a deep, consuming kiss, the chaotic fear finally bleeding out of his body, completely replaced by the undeniable truth that we had won. End of Part 9. Part 10. The morning after the Winter Gala, the world felt entirely different. I woke up to the soft, rhythmic drumming of rain against the windowpane of room 308. The gray morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long, peaceful shadows across the room. My body felt heavy, completely drained from the adrenaline of the previous night, but my chest felt lighter than it had in months. I shifted slightly against the pillows, and the immediate, familiar tightening of a strong arm around my waist reminded me exactly where I was. I was entirely cocooned in Asher's embrace, my back pressed flush against his broad chest. His breathing was deep and even, his face buried in my hair. I carefully turned over in his arms, not wanting to wake him, but the moment I moved, his icy gray eyes fluttered open. They instantly locked onto mine, completely clear and entirely devoid of the terrifying, feral panic that had consumed him at the estate. "Morning," Asher murmured, his voice a rough, sleep-heavy rumble that sent a warm shiver down my spine. His hand moved up from my waist, his long fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw before coming to rest softly over the mark on my neck. It had become an unconscious habit of his, a constant need to reassure himself that I was still there, still his. "Morning," I whispered back, leaning into his touch. "How are you feeling?" Asher didn't answer immediately. He let out a slow exhale, his gaze drifting across the small, cramped dormitory room. Our bespoke tuxedos from the night before were discarded carelessly on the floor, a stark contrast to his usual immaculate habits. The expensive silk ties were tangled with my beige hoodies near the desk. "I feel." Asher paused, a faint, incredibly genuine smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "Free. For the first time in my entire life, I feel completely free." I smiled, my heart doing a joyous little flip in my chest. "No regrets about walking away from the Empire?" "The only empire I care about is right here," he replied smoothly, leaning in to press a slow, lingering kiss to my lips. He tasted like sleep and something wonderfully warm. "Besides, my mother is ruthless, but she isn't foolish. She knows that if she completely cuts me off, she loses her only heir, and the board will panic. She'll try to freeze my accounts, but she's a few months too late." I pulled back slightly, looking at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" The corners of his eyes crinkled in amusement. "I turned 21 in October, Leo. I legally gained control of my grandfather's independent trust. I spent the last 3 months quietly moving my assets out of her reach. I didn't want to tell anyone until it was finalized. Even if she burns my shares of the main company, we have more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. I can finish my architecture degree, start my own firm, and never have to attend another miserable gala again." I stared at him, absolutely speechless. The untouchable enigma hadn't just broken the doors of the conservatory. He had completely outplayed the matriarch of the Vance family at her own game. "You plan this," I breathed out, amazed. "I plan everything," Asher said, his voice dropping into that low, dangerously confident register. He pulled me closer until there was absolutely no space between us, including the fact that we are not leaving this bed for at least another 3 hours. Before I could formulate a witty response, the loud, obnoxious sound of knuckles hammering against our dorm door shattered the peaceful silence. Bang, bang, bang. "Vance, Leo, open up. I know you're in there." Asher groaned, letting his head drop back against the pillows. The lethal, icy aura instantly returned, his jaw clenching in irritation. "I am going to murder Tristan. I am going to throw him out of this window." "Be nice," I laughed, pushing against his chest to sit up. "He's probably just worried." I quickly threw on one of Asher's oversized black t-shirts and a pair of sweatpants, walking over to unlock the door. The moment the lock clicked, Tristan practically fell into the room, holding 2 massive cups of iced coffee. Julian followed closely behind him, looking perfectly composed in a sharp navy coat, though his eyes were bright with undeniable amusement. "Tell me everything," Tristan demanded immediately, slamming the coffees down on Asher's desk. "The group chats have been exploding since midnight. The society blogs are in shambles. Did you really rip a solid mahogany door off its hinges? Because the heiress of the Sterling family tweeted that you looked like a literal demon straight out of the underworld." Asher sat up in bed, running a hand through his messy dark hair, looking completely unbothered by his newfound legendary status. "It was a structurally weak door," he stated flatly. Julian chuckled, pushing his silver-rimmed glasses up his nose. "Structurally weak or not, the entire elite circle is terrified of you now. Your mother apparently left the gala an hour after you did, looking like she had seen a ghost. I have to admit, Asher, it was the most dramatic exit in Vance family history." Tristan turned to me, his bright blue eyes wide with awe. "And you?" The rumor is that Eleanor offered you a blank check, and you told her to shove it. Is that true? I felt my cheeks flush. I didn't tell her to shove it. I just gave her some literary feedback on her villain monologue. Tristan burst out laughing, clapping me hard on the shoulder. I knew I liked you, Leo. You are the only person on this entire planet who could put Eleanor Vance in her place and tame this absolute menace. He pointed a thumb at Asher. All in the same night. Asher stood up, walking over to wrap a possessive arm around my waist, pulling me away from Tristan. His scent flared slightly, a subtle, protective warning. All right, you have your gossip. Now get out. Both of you. We're going, Julian said smoothly, turning toward the door. We just wanted to make sure you were both alive. See you in class, Leo. When the door finally clicked shut behind them, leaving us alone in the quiet dorm room once more, Asher sighed heavily, resting his chin on the top of my head. I'm serious, he murmured. I'm changing the locks. The rest of the academic year passed in a beautiful, entirely unexpected blur. The rumors and the staring eventually faded, turning our dramatic relationship into just another accepted fact of campus life. Nobody bothered us. Nobody dared to cross Asher, and in return, the terrifying enigma of the architecture department became a permanent fixture outside the English literature lecture halls, waiting quietly for me with a cup of peppermint tea every single afternoon. Room 308, once a battlefield of cold minimalism and beige chaos, had transformed completely into our space. The invisible dividing line was gone. My books were stacked on his pristine desk, his drafting pens were mixed in with my highlighters, and the scent of cedar, rain, and my own subtle sweetness blended perfectly in the air. But as the spring semester drew to a close, reality began to set in. Dormitory contracts were ending. It was the final week of exams. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes, trying to figure out how I had accumulated so many books in 1 year. Asher was sitting on his bed, casually scrolling through his laptop. I guess I need to start looking at the off-campus junior apartments, I sighed, tossing a heavy Shakespeare anthology into a box. Hopefully, I can find a roommate who doesn't terrify the entire student body. The typing on Asher's laptop stopped immediately. I looked up. He was staring at me, his gray eyes narrowed in sheer confusion. What are you talking about? Next year, I explained, gesturing to the boxes. I need to find a place to live, and a roommate to split rent with. Asher closed his laptop with a loud, definitive snap. He stood up, walking over to where I was sitting on the floor. He crouched down in front of me, his large hands reaching out to gently grip my knees. Leo, he said, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and deep affection. Did you really think I was going to let you live with someone else? My heart skipped a beat. Well, I mean, we haven't talked about it. I just assumed you would get some incredibly fancy penthouse downtown, and... I did, Asher interrupted smoothly. I blinked. You did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy matte black key. He held it out, dropping it gently into my open palm. The metal was cold, but the gesture sent a wave of absolute heat straight to my chest. It's a 2-bedroom loft near the Arts District, Asher explained, his eyes softening as he looked at me. It has massive windows with natural light, a private balcony, and I already had contractors install floor-to-ceiling bookshelves in the 2nd bedroom, so you can have your own personal library. I stared at the key in my hand, my throat suddenly feeling incredibly tight. Asher, I can't afford half the rent on a place like that. I don't care about the rent, Leo, he murmured, moving closer until our knees bumped. His hands slid up from my legs, gently cupping my face. I care about coming home to you. I care about waking up next to you every single morning. I care about making sure you have a safe, quiet place to read your tragedies while I work on my blueprints. He pressed his forehead against mine, his scent wrapping around me, heavy with devotion and absolute certainty. You are my home now, Asher whispered, his voice vibrating against my skin. Where I go, you go. That is the only arrangement I am ever going to accept. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, completely overwhelmed by the depth of the love radiating from him. The guy who had once built impenetrable walls of ice around his heart was now tearing them all down, just to build a sanctuary for me. Okay, I breathed out, a watery smile breaking across my face. Okay, let's move in together. Asher let out a long, relieved exhale, leaning in to capture my lips in a deep, passionate kiss. It wasn't the frantic, desperate kiss of a rut, or the protective, terrifying heat of the gala. It was slow, steady, and filled with a profound promise for the future. When we finally finished packing up room 308 later that afternoon, the space looked exactly as it had on the very first day I walked in. Bare mattresses, empty desks, and silence. I stood in the doorway, my heavy duffel bag slung over my shoulder, looking back at the small room that had completely changed my life. I remembered the fear I felt when I first saw the name Vance on my housing portal. I remembered the cold, terrifying enigma who had told me to keep my distance, the very same enigma who was now standing next to me in the hallway, holding 3 of my heaviest boxes without a single complaint. "Ready?" Asher asked softly, coming up behind me. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his free arm wrapping securely around my waist. I leaned back into his solid, warm chest, completely anchored by his presence. I reached up, my fingers brushing against his arm. "Yeah," I smiled, turning my head to press a soft kiss against his jaw. "I'm ready." Asher pulled the heavy wooden door shut, the lock clicking loudly in the quiet hallway. We walked away from room 308, hand in hand, stepping out into a future that was no longer cold and isolated, but entirely filled with light, warmth, and the unbreakable bond of the enigma who had finally learned how to love. End of part 10. Wow, just wow. What an absolute roller coaster of emotions that was. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to your BL boyfriend. If you're still breathing after that intense, beautiful journey with Leo and Asher, take a deep breath with me. We made it to the end, and honestly, my heart is still pounding. Let's just take a moment to really unpack everything we just experienced in this story, because there is so much to talk about. We started off in that tiny, tense space of room 308. We had Leo, this sweet, normal literature student who just wanted to read his books in peace, suddenly thrown into the orbit of Asher Vance, the cold, untouchable, terrifying campus enigma. The tension in those first few days? Absolutely electric. I mean, who could forget that moment Asher caught Leo from falling over the trash can? We all knew right then and there that the Ice King was already melting, even if he didn't want to admit it yet. But what I really loved about this story is how it breaks down the typical rich, toxic bad boy trope. Yes, Asher was intimidating, and yes, his pheromones were off the charts, but beneath that icy exterior, he was just a guy terrified of being used. He was so desperate to protect the one person who finally saw him as a human being, not just a billionaire heir. And Leo, can we please give a massive round of applause for our boy Leo? He didn't just cower or run away when things got tough, even when Victoria tried to poison his mind. But the absolute best part? When Eleanor Vance cornered him at the Winter Gala and literally offered him a blank check to leave her son, Leo didn't just refuse. He gave her a literature lesson on why she was the villain of her own story. That takes some serious guts. Asher ripping those mahogany doors off the hinges right after was just the cherry on top. Now, I really want to hear from you guys, because I know you were screaming at your screens just like I was. Let's chat in the comments. What was your absolute favorite moment in the story? Was it the dramatic piggyback ride out of the underground gallery party? Or maybe that intense, heart-stopping moment when Asher claimed Leo during his rut? Also, be completely honest with me. If you were in Leo's shoes, staring down a terrifying billionaire matriarch in a freezing conservatory, would you have taken the blank check, or would you have fought for your enigma? Let me know your honest answers down below. I read all of your comments, and I love seeing your reactions. If this story made your heart flutter, please do me a massive favor and hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content exactly like this. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Your BL Boyfriend family. Turn on those notification bells so you never miss another intense, romantic, and heart-melting BL story from us. Thank you so much for watching, for feeling all these crazy emotions with me, and for being the absolute best viewers on YouTube. Stay safe, stay romantic, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye for now.